I feel like we can all relate to wearing both hats here, both the teacher and the coach or leader,
Hmm.
where you're trying to incorporate something new or try a new innovation or incorporate a new resource, but you're feeling that pressure of knowing that if I do this, if I take this pivot, if I deviate from the plan, I may not cover everything. You
Mm,
have this, super tight pacing. You know that there's already more than 10 months of learning in your grade level. And so knowing that if you're going to take this risk and you're going to try something new and it might take longer or might pull me off course, now I may not get to everything. And that I think is really scary for a lot of teachers,
right.
when they feel a responsibility to cover their grade level standards or cover the expectations by the end of the year.
Yeah, like my plate is full. How am I supposed to do this new thing? Like where does that fit in the day? And that's like the valid concern we have as a teacher in teaching students in the classrooms, because there's so many things now. But as a leader, a coach, a coordinator who's trying to make a difference and shift instruction because they know the research says so, that's what you're hearing. You're hearing like, and you're saying like, I know they're right. Like, well, how can I make this work when they have so many things on their plates? And that's what we want to talk about here today. So let's jump in.
Yeah, I think one of the first things that are on our mind when you're starting that school year, that semester as a teacher, is you're looking at your long range plan. You've sort of chunked a certain amount of time for each concept, and you're kind of hoping everything will work out perfectly. And I don't know, I think I'm 0 for 20 on it ever working out as I thought it would, right? But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's really about kind of zooming out and trying to figure out, okay, first of all, what am I trying to do here? And I think ultimately at the end of the day, when we're thinking about covering curriculum, it really gets you thinking very robotically. And I think it really promotes us doing the opposite of what we're really trying to advocate, right? Which is really trying to meet learners where they are and trying to help them build that understanding. So here, I want to chat a little bit about, some of these challenges, but then also maybe some of the things we can do to slowly shift that mindset from covering curriculum to actually uncovering curriculum. And we might go back into the old tickle trunk there, John, and talk about some of the things we used to really advocate for on the show, and we haven't necessarily talked a whole lot about, which is the idea of even spiraling curriculum.
I wonder if our American listeners know what the tickle trunk is.
Beth,
Yeah, the American listener doesn't.
she's
Yeah.
like,
My
I don't
goodness.
even know what you just said, and I don't
Man.
even know if you should have said it.
It's a
I'm a
part of
huge
all of our
one.
childhoods.
Yes,
know?
I'm a huge Mr. Dress Up fan.
I was gonna say
So,
I feel
yeah,
like it's familiar, but it's not ringing a bell.
It's Mr. Dress Up, who was
Yeah.
on
Mr.
Canadian
Dress-Up.
kids
He's like the
programming.
Canadian
Mr. Rogers.
Mr. Rogers, right?
Yeah,
got
you
it.
got to do a quick Google search there, and it'll be you'll experience all of our childhood memories.
I was
coming
gonna say
to
polka
life.
dot door, which is also a Canadian reference.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Back to you, Yvette, for spiraling. Get
Yeah.
us into it.
Well, I guess I was just having this moment reflecting when Kyle was saying, he was 0 for 20. I think that the challenge when I was first teaching was that I was teaching in units. And it's like, well, if I get off pace, I'm not going to get to that entire unit. It's like I left data management
Right.
for the end of the semester. And if I derail at all, then I'm going to skip an entire unit of instruction.
Totally.
Where if we didn't teach that way, if we didn't teach concepts in silos as a single unit that we only see at this point in the year, I think that would alleviate some of the teacher pressure, because we wouldn't be missing entire standards or expectations because they'd be woven throughout the learning throughout the year.
Right. No, but think about that for a sec. What allowed you to move to teach that way?
So I guess that comes back to the question of my own capacity, but also permission, right? Like I did have a textbook, and the textbook was presented in a particular order and there was pacing, but I did have the autonomy to work flexibly within my grade level. And I didn't wait until December to introduce data management. I incorporated data management throughout the semester. So I guess it's twofold, right? It's like I was positioned to do that work at that time, and I had support from a teaching partner and support from my math community. And I also had administration and leadership who was allowing me to implement that resource or curriculum with integrity rather than rigidity.
Yeah, I'd also like to just add to that, Yvette, that it sounds like in your situation, you deeply understood your curriculum, your resources, what you were using. I feel like we've kind of gotten ourselves into a situation over the last, I don't know, I'm going to say 8 years, especially in the United States, with the implementation of the Common Core State Standards for mathematics. A lot of the publishing companies were making changes to the curriculum that were really unfamiliar to a lot of teachers teaching math, embracing these best practices now in mathematics that weren't familiar to them. And so I think we've gotten ourselves in a situation where a new curriculum maybe is implemented because the school or the school district recognized a need to kind of move forward toward embracing these standards a little bit more. And then the teachers were just like day at a time. They were treading water. They weren't seeing the big picture of the scope of the curriculum or the resources. They were just going unit by unit or lesson by lesson and feeling like, I run into this a lot with a lot of the clients I work with, is that feeling like, well, I can't move on because they didn't master this. And so then they just hang out in this one unit of study rather than recognizing, looking ahead and saying, well, if I continue on, this is actually being applied in the next unit. And so that natural spiral review is kind of built in because math does build, right? But I think it's positioning teachers to see the big picture in the resources or the curricula that they're using, I think is maybe a missing piece. And maybe we can talk about that a little bit.
100%. I would argue, we talk about it all the time, is like our own content knowledge is so critical in order to do any of this well, whether we are just going to go unit by unit, like I did for many years until I started spiraling. If I'm spiraling and I'm not really sure how things connect, then that can be really tricky, right? And it can be scary. The other like barrier that I want to share here that I think we all, we know this is happening. We see it in a lot of the districts that we work with through our district improvement program. But the reality is that if we are, say, using a pacing guide, and that pacing guide says thou shalt do this, this, and this in this order and for this length of time, that can kind of put you in kind of a tricky spot as well as an educator. So even if you feel prepared or able to introduce some sort of spiraling, you might feel restricted if the rest of your division or the rest of your school or the leadership team in your school or division aren't necessarily on the same page here. So some of these barriers can be really challenging. And, I would argue that assuming you don't have that barrier and you do have a little bit more freedom to consider some of these things, sometimes by doing the spiraling and by just limiting how deep you go the first time through can really help you at least alleviate that sort of challenge that Yvette was facing, where there's an entire unit that I'm not going to touch on. Maybe I'm not going to get to the depth that I would hope, but ultimately I'm going to at least ensure that everything gets some attention. And then as the year goes on and we determine where we are, as we see that less and less days are left in the school calendar, we can then start, trying to figure out like, where do we want to go back to? Like, where are we going to get the most bang for our math buck here in terms of time? And we can kind of hone in on those pieces. And like you're saying, Beth, oftentimes when we focus on the important pieces, those essential understandings, oftentimes the other pieces kind of come into play as well. Like, I don't want to say it's just going to happen on its own, but when we're focusing on the things that really matter, especially as the year goes on, some of those connections start to go and some of those light bulbs start to go off as well. And students start to see it as a much more connected understanding instead of very segmented or siloed like we might see in some of the older traditional unit approaches.
What I think I just heard through this conversation is that if we have in place a really high quality instructional material, a really solid core resource or curriculum that we trust, then it shouldn't be an either or. right? Any of the innovations that you're trying to support should live and breathe within that particular resource. And it's just about supporting teachers and understanding it with integrity and deepening their implementation of that high quality material. Not to be rigid, but to use it with integrity and to follow the pacing, because it will be spiraled and it will create opportunities for the incorporation of high instructional practices. So that's kind of what I heard, is like one of the ways that we can address this time issue is that if we put a high quality instructional material in place and we just put all of our effort and energy into supporting the implementation with integrity, because we know that any innovation that we're striving for will live within that particular resource or curriculum. I guess the challenge would be for in spaces where that's not the case. Beth and I just met with the district recently where it's like they don't have a curriculum or a resource.
Yeah.
Or we have some places where they have one, but it's not great.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe this is one of our recommendations, is if that's the case, if it's like, if we cannot trust the resource or we can't trust the curriculum that we've put in the hands of our educators to do the things that we want them to do, which is to incorporate the effective teaching practices, to spiral, to not teach concepts in isolation, to connect, big ideas across the year. If that's not true, if we can't trust the resource we have in place to do that, then that's probably one area that we want to investigate as a district or a state or a province.
You're saying like go and find one?
I guess it's like, if you don't have one currently, if you can't confidently say that if teachers were to implement this curriculum or resource with integrity, which gives them, of course, professional autonomy to make decisions that are responsive, and they aren't positioned to do that while incorporating the effective teaching practices and strong assessment practices. They don't have opportunities to revisit concepts. Like, I know I was reviewing a curriculum that's on the approved list here in Ontario recently, and I was like, oh, we don't do division until May. Like, we don't see division the entire year until the month of May, that's problematic. And
I wonder why students struggle with it.
Right. So I guess maybe that's step one. Because maybe then these aren't competing priorities. It's not like stop what you're doing or, slow down what you're doing or deviate from what you're doing because we're going to try this new innovation. It's like, no, this innovation lives within your pacing that you already have in place. We're just going to do it with more intention. We're going to investigate it deeper. We're going to build our capacity around it.
Right. Like we've said this on previous episodes, is that what you're doing is you're making sure there's a foundational floor to build from, because it's hard to innovate without the foundation. Like if you're every day trying to spend time gathering resources for that one lesson to do all the things that you just said, it's hard to do that every single day. Knowing like that foundation can give you, tomorrow I know that that's going to be good. And 2 days from now, I'm going to spend time with my colleagues to innovate on top of that. And then therefore you can grow that way. So I like that recommendation. That would be where you might want to spend some time as a leader to like, oh, do we have a foundational floor? How do I know that I have a foundational floor to build from if we don't? Because that can free up some time to do the things that you know that are important. The other thing I want to kind of talk about here too, around the barriers here, the things that we're saying, like we got too many things on our plate. How do we kind of go down that route? And I think what I heard you folks say is that when we're teaching, if we can spiral, if we can create use the instructional material that's the right fit, so that we're not leaving things to the end or we're not teaching in silos, then that can be a place where we're like, focus on what really matters. So that as a teaching suggestion, that's like what we would want to do, as long as, we said this earlier, as long as we're prioritizing that's what we're wanting to do, that's where we're trying to go. Because I think we said this earlier, like the permission aspect of like, are we prioritizing that as a system, as a school, that we know that's what we're wanting to do, is an important component. We're not going to take those risks if we don't have trust in our teachers. If our leaders don't trust the teachers are going to make appropriate decisions there, like that's an issue. The other issue here is thinking about the plate. If we have too many things on our plate, how do we know what we could take off our plate? And we've talked about this a number of times over the last year with some of our district partners, is to say that's a And to me, that's sometimes a measurement issue, is that we've been putting things on our plates, our teachers' plates, without knowing the impact that that thing has in what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. We load the plate without knowing when is it time to take that thing off the plate, because it didn't actually have any impact. And we don't know the answer to that. And when we don't know the answer to that, it's problematic, because we don't know if we should take it off the plate. But what we don't know really is, if I take it off the plate, will that make all the things go down? Like make the whole thing crumble? We don't know. And that's, to me, we've been putting things in place and doing the spaghetti at the wall without knowing the impact of what moves we're trying to make. And if we start redesigning our moves with intentionality of like, well, if I do that, then what impact will we have and how will I know? That can help you decide to take it off the plate at the end of the year or in 2 years, or to put it on the plate. And then that can help free the plate so that there's not so many priorities competing with a teacher who's teaching many subjects, many different varieties of learners in the classroom. So we've got to consider that for sure. But I think as a leader or as a coach or coordinator, I do want to think about, like, am I making sure that the things I continually add to teachers' plates, is there like the fail safe that I'll know that I should take that off the plate?
John, I would even say, I would add to that maybe it's just helping teachers see how the things on the plate are all related. I'm just going to use the plate example here. So you got your core material, your core curriculum, that's your mashed potatoes, right? But we want teachers doing number talks. That's maybe a pat of butter, right? That works with the mashed potatoes really, really well. It's not
specifically.
it's not sitting on the side of the plate all by itself. We're putting it on top of those mashed potatoes. So we're seeing that connection there. We want teachers working on problem strings, help them understand where those problem strings maybe exist.
What you're saying, Beth, is you're dedicating time to supporting teachers with
Absolutely.
the moves you're making. Like
Absolutely.
you're saying, I'm not just saying go do. I'm saying I'm actually going to spend time with the professional development time I have throughout the year to focus on these things and make it clear and work with teachers instead of just saying I'm dumping.
Yeah. And we talked a lot about, teaching in isolation. When we as administrators or coaches add things in isolation, teachers will see that as just something else to add to the plate. And how do I have the time to do all that within my lesson time? It's like add on. Whereas, I think that just about any good resource that's an additional resource that we're asking, teachers to try to implement in their classroom is going to have connections to what they're currently doing. It's not a separate thing that they now have to do. And so I think it's helping the teachers to see the connections in these maybe resources, these extra resources that otherwise would look like we're just adding on, helping them to see the connection to what they're currently doing or where it lives within their instructional materials.
I was just thinking about the cognitive load or the capacity of the educator in doing all this new learning as you were describing that, Beth. And I was thinking about my own journey. And it's like, when was I in a position to add more to my plate? Right? So imagine, it's my first time teaching that grade. And I'm just learning the core resource for the first time, and I don't even know the grade level expectations by the end of the year for this particular grade level. Is it the role of the coach and the leader to know where teachers are on their own learning journey and when they're ready for more on their plate? And this, I don't know the answer to this. Like, would I throw everything at them at once and say, like, this is a comprehensive math block? It has small group instruction. You're going to use the core resource. You're going to add mini lessons. You're going to, would you do it all at once? Or is there a place that you would start and then build from? And I'm actually genuinely asking this to the group. Like, I'm trying to put myself in a position of, I'm working with a new teacher. I understand that it's all new to them. Mm-hmm. Where do I start? And do we go out of the gate with the comprehensive picture, or do we build from a foundation and continue to innovate?
I love this question. And I think I don't know if there is an answer, that the answer of it depends is probably going to be the one that will prevail here, because I think we also have to understand who the individual educator is as, say, a person, like some people, get overwhelmed very quickly, and maybe they get anxious, thinking about the big picture, and I'm so far from where, that picture needs to be. And now I'm losing sleep at night. Whereas you get somebody else on the other side and they're going like, I need to see that. Like their personality type almost needs to know what the end goal is before they can actually start making these moves. So I think there's a lot of, and this is what makes us work so incredibly hard. Like it would be so much easier if we were all just machines and we all behaved the exact same way. But in reality, like we're all so different, just like our students are different. And that's what makes this so challenging. So I think, as a leader, if I'm a coach, if I'm a consultant, if I'm a coordinator, really trying to get a sense of who you're working with and differentiating, as we always say, differentiating for them as to where they are and what they're ready to tackle at that time, I think is one of the most important pieces that we have to have in any stage of education, whether it's in the classroom working with the teacher, as a teacher working with students, or whether it's coaches working with teachers. We're all the same. We're just different ages, and we're learning along the way. And I think, as we analyze that and we really try to pay attention to what that individual could benefit from at that time, I think that's going to help you try to navigate what that might look like and sound like. Now, if we zoom all the way out to the district office, some people are shaking their heads and saying, Kyle, you're not being very helpful for me here because I've got all these teachers or I have all these coaches. Like, what am I supposed to do? And I think that's where, we often talk about our waterfall approach here. When we're working with districts, we're working with the leadership team for a long time to make sure that everybody on that team is clear of what's going on so that everybody feels confident, so that as we go to the next level, the coaches and the coaches work with teachers, that we have a clear vision of what that might look like and sound like. However, there's going to be some different little paths, I think, for different individuals in the system in order to get them to the next step and get them closer to that end goal.
So I feel like the teacher challenge that we discussed today, that we've all experienced, is this pressure of wanting to innovate, wanting to add more, wanting to refine our practice without deviating from the path. It's like, I already know there's too much to cover in too little time. How am I going to take this risk? And so we talked about, I would say some of our big ideas today here were around high quality instructional materials in the hands of our educators is a really good place to start, because then that's the foundation that we build from. And if everybody has that foundation, then we can start to add in mini lessons and we can start to add in better practices around assessments or more formative assessment opportunities. But having that foundation is really critical. Another big idea that I think we talked about today is just ensuring that we do have that psychological safety for educators to take a risk. So knowing that if they deviate from that pacing by a day, a week, because they're trying something new or they're in this deep cognitive load of learning something, that they're not going to be reprimanded or there isn't going to be pushback from their community or from their leadership. I think that lastly, what we just talked about is being, as if you're a coach or you're a leader, knowing that this journey is going to look different for all educators, but having the big picture of what the end result is in mind is really important. It's just like that idea of backwards design, right? Grant Wiggins. It's like, if we don't know where we're all trying to go, if we don't collectively understand, it goes back to also Systems for Instructional Improvement, where they talk about having this common understanding of high quality, ambitious teaching. So it's like, we need to know what the end result is going to look like, sound like, feel like, and then our coaching can position us to make the right next step for every teacher that we're supporting. So high quality instructional material was a big one, psychological safety, and then lastly, that differentiated support and ongoing support for educators, knowing what the end result is.
And if you are, in a position of leadership and you're thinking about making these moves and helping teachers make these moves, and you need a little bit of guidance, or if you need some structure, that's what we do in our support programs. We help teams make these types of moves and get clear and on the creating their flywheel and making that flywheel move inside a school or school district. You can reach out to us over at makemathmoments.com/district. And we look forward to seeing you there if you need to. Otherwise, we will see you in the next episode.